My name is Elliott McKinley. I am a composer and host of a web show called Composers at Home, Maybe Drinking Coffee. I am also the director of the Alba Music Festival Composition Program in Alba, Italy, which runs every year, concurrent with the Alba Music Festival, the end of May into early June. Unfortunately, this year, due to COVID-19, we had to postpone and cancel our program. However, the Alba Music Festival is continuing in a smaller online format for 2020. I am very happy to contribute several video programs for this year's online festival to represent the composition program, featuring recent and current performers, faculty, and several of the chosen 2020 composition fellows. So in this episode, I am thrilled to be joined by my friend, violinist, and founding member of the Borromeo String Quartet, Nicholas Kitchen, this morning. Nick, I've known for many years, and the Borromeo String Quartet was due to be our ensemble in residence in Alba for 2020. They were not only going to premiere and record the music of our Alba Composition Fellows, but they were also going to put on concerts of music by our faculty and also perform Beethoven. So Nick has become something of a specialist in Beethoven, and this is not just because he likes Beethoven, but also because he has used the original manuscripts to dive into Beethoven's working process, not only as a source for learning more about the music, but also for performing the music. And the Borromeo Quartet actually plays from manuscript when they do Beethoven, and they've extended this to other music as well. So we'll talk to Nick about his interest in exploring the music of Beethoven this way, what got him into it, also how he's used source study to increase his own knowledge of Beethoven's music and his own playing, but also how this translates to how he treats and how the quartet treats the music of other composers, and especially that of living composers and working with living composers and new music. Please welcome me in introducing Nicholas Kitchen. Great. Well, Nick, thank you for joining me this morning in our new little reality of COVID-19. So we were talking just a little bit ago, before we dive into some specifics, we were talking about how we were both dealing with the whole crisis situation that we have in various ways. And unfortunately, one of the things that we had to deal with is that instead of you and I sitting across from one another, al fresco, with a nice bottle of wine, with other musicians and composers in Italy, which sounds like a really rough life. So those of you who are watching at home, we do work. There's a lot of work, trust me, but unfortunately we can't do that, and so we have to do this. This is our I guess plan B. That no one would have seen about 9 weeks ago, I guess.
That's right.
Something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, we were looking forward so much to, of course, there is something that everyone in the world knows, which is that Italy just kind of has an answer that no one else has arrived at about life.
Yeah.
Kind of amazing. And of course, it's tragic to think of the struggles that they've had in this, in this crisis. But I think they're finding their way, as we all are. But But of course, we were looking forward so much to sharing that time together. And of course, what was amazing about the plan was that it included such a mix of older music and
Mm-hmm.
truly new music, and some composers that we've known for a while,
Mm-hmm.
people like Derek Bermel,
Mm-hmm.
and then some young composers that of course we wouldn't have known at all.
Yeah.
It's amazing to put people together, and festivals have kind of realized that for a long time, that
Mm-hmm.
it's a kind of magic chemistry,
Yeah.
and and
And
sad that it won't happen this year, but at least we have the different ways we can still encounter each other and
mhm.
still get excited about our work and
Yeah.
where it's going.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah, one of the ways that the Alba Festival has attempted to continue is to have a kind of mini online version of the festival with some pre-recorded concerts and things of this nature. So at least we get to represent a little bit of what we might have done
yeah,
and talk about some of the things that we would have talked about in
yeah.
Italy. And I guess in another way, this might open it up to people who might not have been able to go, obviously, to Italy and hear about the things that we can
Well, and
share.
I know I've found, I happen to have archived a lot of concerts that I've played over the years,
Hmm.
and this is, and I know for many organizations, this is a really nice chance to shine a light on things that may have happened 10 years ago or 8 years ago, or
Right,
no,
right.
and a lot of them are really great concerts, and it's great to be stimulated by them again.
Because you and I have known each other for quite a while. We were both crisscrossing at NEC
Right,
in
right,
some earlier lifetime,
right.
which seems like yesterday, but also seems like a million years ago, as all things do. So, can you give us maybe a little brief history of time with regard to the quartet
Sure.
and its formation initially?
Yeah. Well, we um, our quartet technically formed as a summer project in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we're called the Borromeo.
Borromeo, yeah.
And it was because of a suggestion. Both Ruggero Alifranchini, the original second violinist, and myself were students of Shimon Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you don't have to go to a summer festival. You could get together a quartet and just work hard on some pieces and
Mm-hmm.
maybe play a few concerts.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a great way for you to, you know, have a productive summer. And we
Mm-hmm.
took him at his word. And Ruggiero said, well, I think my father could help arrange some concerts. In fact, in the area right near Lago Maggiore. And
Yeah, it's beautiful there. Oh.
well, it is. It is. And our very first concert was right near the Isola Bella and Isola Madre, and right
Mm-hmm.
Borromeo Island.
Mm-hmm.
That's in
Mm-hmm.
fact why our name went that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
And we came back, and not to go into too many specifics, but at that moment the Curtis Institute was going to the Avion Festival, which at that point had also the Avion International String Quartet competition
Mm-hmm.
happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And being really stupid as we were, oh, we can do the competition at the same time that the orchestra is there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it really became what was kind of fun was that the press actually liked that a lot, because we were literally bouncing from one round of the competition into an orchestra rehearsal and back, and it was actually fun in a terrible and chaotic kind of way.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we actually won lots and lots of prizes in that competition, and that became a very important start for
Yeah.
our career.
Yeah.
And then very shortly after that, and this is where NEC comes into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
As we were leaving Curtis, Yisun, our cellist, said, I really think NEC would be a great place for a string quartet to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked to her teacher, Larry Lesser, who was the president,
Yeah.
and said, well, is there any chance we might do the artist diploma as a quartet?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, this never happened before, but why don't we'll ask if you can audition.
Mm-hmm.
They asked. And I said, yes. And we did the artist diploma.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it had never been done. So
Mm-hmm.
we sort of invented it as we went along.
Mm-hmm.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
And it was at that time that we also won Young Concert Artist, and they had not had a quartet for many years. So the moment we won that, we instantly had like 100 concerts. So we just were thrown, absolutely hurled
Just
into the swimming pool.
like deep end. You were just like, what's this?
That's
Suddenly
right.
we're concert artists.
That's right. And, but what was great is there we were at NEC, and we were studying with lots of the faculty, which was a great privilege, kind of not having a really structured program.
Mm-hmm.
And we studied all those pieces we had to play for those concerts, and it was amazing. Yeah. And then when we graduated, the school asked us if we would be quartet in residence, and that's basically a very short story that has we've been there since 1992. So
that's right. Yeah. And that's
we've done a lot since then and all sorts of different things, but we've loved having NEC as our real home and our place of training.
I mean, NEC is one of the top institutions, New England Conservatory of Music, of which I'm an alum, and to have that kind of as your home base is just amazing. And Jordan Hall. And again, for those who don't know, have never been to Jordan Hall, it is one of the top 10 halls in the world. It's an amazing place to both experience music and make music.
It's incredible the history that your dad had there, and then the history that you had, and we feel it's kind of amazing when you think of. I even get. Whenever I get a chance to even read about the origins of the conservatory with like Eben Jordan and all his amazing missions with what music could mean to people, it's a great place to feel part of.
Yeah, it really is. Could you give us some maybe path through what the ensemble's perhaps musical objectives have been and how they've changed over the last 25 years?
Sure. I mean, it is I mean, it's not that any group would probably say something similar, but I do feel like we managed to find, we're seeking to have the character of the music come to life. I mean, that's a obvious thing to say, but that's what we're seeking. And what's interesting is that when you're kind of truthful about that quest, it often does surprising things. And you have all these kind of paradoxes of both the organizational strength of music, but also the spontaneity and the sort of, they're just wonderful complexities to what that means. And then when you kind of put it into the timeline, I mean, one interesting thing about our quartet is we've now, I picked up on a tradition that started with Mozart and Beethoven and von Swieten way, way back. Where von Swieten he said to the people in his house, please arrange the well-tempered clavier for string quartet. And Mozart did that, and Beethoven did that too. And I kind of said, well, let's go down that road. And so I actually arranged both books of the well-tempered clavier, and we recorded the first book, but we were going to play on March 21st, Bach's birthday this year. We were going to play all of book 2.
Wow.
Now that didn't happen for reasons.
For obvious reasons, right.
But nonetheless, we have really gotten into all of those works. And, there are ways quartets sometimes go further back in time. But one thing I love is that when you try to bring those fugues to life, again, the complexity of what that means. When people say fugues are a strict form, I find that a very strange statement, actually. I shouldn't say strange. There are strict things about it, but it's actually one of the most fanciful ways music can be unfolded. And certainly Bach does that like no one else. contrast that to what we were planning to do at the Alba Festival,
Mm-hmm.
where you're really, you may be dealing with experienced composers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it happened. We worked a tremendous amount personally with Leon Kirshner.
Yeah, that's
And,
right.
and we worked on his music, but we also worked on Mozart and Beethoven,
Mm-hmm.
and that was, really, really interesting.
Mm.
Of course, an amusing, this is just an anecdote, but it was really funny when we played the first string quartet, because we said, well, no, you really need to do the sforzando there. And we said, well, Mr. Kirshner, there isn't a sforzando there. And he said, but yes, there is. Oh, yes, there is. And we showed him, and there isn't. And oh, no, yes, there is. and I just kind of loved the way that, I mean, it was very funny, of course.
Right. Kind
at
of
the same time, it points out how definite, but also how changeable it is.
Yeah.
When music is kind of finding its way.
Yeah.
And of course, to see young composers do that, they know part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some cases in music history where we have like the Brahms B major trio, and you have the version that he wrote when he was really a young man,
Right.
and then the version that he completed near the end of his life.
Yeah.
And of course, the interesting things is that some of the greatest ideas are totally intact in the first version.
Yeah.
Complete. But a lot of the connecting tissue and how he handles it and how he proportions it is frankly not that successful in the first version.
Yeah.
And is absolutely masterful in the second one.
Right. As he's gotten more experience with handling time and unfolding the ideas. Yeah.
And so I think when we're working and when we see composers working and we're dealing with, so I said we happen to have this wonderful chance to have Bach as a kind of even more of a bedrock for us than it might have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's important, because certainly when you get into Beethoven, you realize that those 96 pieces of the Well-Tempered Clavier were like literally the blood in his veins, kind of.
Yeah. That was like the life force.
That's right.
Yeah.
And with that same combination of the strictness of it, but also the fantasy of it.
Yeah.
And so, what all that boils down to, you were asking about kind of the somewhat the identity of the quartet.
Yeah.
I just think we love the fact that for us and for other groups, that are really great groups. I mean, we do our best to be as great as we can.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But we're all finding that set of surprises, that funny mixture of creativity and predictability. Which is I don't think anybody can quite define it. If you go too far down one path, it doesn't really. Too far down the other path, it doesn't really work.
Right.
Really wonderful pieces of art are really somewhere right in between.
In between, yeah, exactly. As I remember, and still to this day, you're interested in not just doing one thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I maybe didn't, it's hard to articulate it well, but I just find, I love how the minute you look really closely at something, it's always full of surprises.
Yeah.
And that's just this wonderful thing that I think that's how we can keep, we build relationships with new music, but of course we can nourish the relationship with this truly great music of the past for lifetimes.
Right. Besides the obvious reason that Beethoven wrote, some of the best quartet music in the literature, what drew you into Beethoven's world to the extent that you wanted to travel down a path of really research and bringing something different to the music rather than just going off of what would be the Urtext?
Yeah. Or I mean, or the urtext that we're accustomed to is a great achievement in and of itself, but it happens
Mm-hmm.
that our dialogue with sources has kind of added a new layer to it,
Mm-hmm.
which has been pretty exciting, and
Mm-hmm.
that's basically coming from the manuscripts
Right.
that Beethoven.
When you first thought about going into the manuscripts, was that because you wanted to see if there was something there that you could learn more initially? I mean, how was it? Was it both musical curiosity and performative, or what did it start out one way and then sort of morph into another?
Well, one irony here is that my mother, besides being a professional violinist and
Mm-hmm.
founding a school, very involved in music, she actually it worked with Shakespearean sources and trying to sort out
Oh,
some of the
interesting.
puzzles of
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
yeah,
So I would have never even thought of that, but in hindsight, I realized that I've end up doing something a little bit related to what she did.
mm-hmm.
And uh, just to give a little idea, I felt very lucky to work with Shimon Goldberg
Mm-hmm.
while I was at the Curtis Institute of Music. I worked with him for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I had a special privilege that his widow made an arrangement that I'm playing on his very beautiful Guarneri del Gesù violin, and
Yeah.
it's a tremendous honor to do my best to
Mm-hmm.
add something to his
Mm-hmm.
tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Goldberg had this amazing way of, well, he made the point that so many of our great composers, Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn, even,
Mm-hmm.
I think of it that way, and Bartok and Brahms and etc.
Right.
Not all of them were great performers, but many of them were great performers.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they wrote for an instrument and when they conceived of the stage,
Mm-hmm.
they were conceiving of it from this core experience that
Mm-hmm.
they themselves had and excelled at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that meant that when Beethoven wrote a score, he was not just sort of carrying out a logic that was intrinsic to the score itself.
Mm-hmm.
He was combining that
Mm-hmm.
with a firsthand connoisseur's knowledge of
Mm-hmm.
what it means to be on stage. So when
Right.
he gives advice about staccato or a certain kind of
Mm-hmm.
item,
Mm-hmm.
that it's not um, it's not in any way a decorative item.
Yeah. Right. It's
It,
not just
it,
there for some filigree.
that's right. I mean, not that it would be, but what Mr. Goldberg was saying is you've got to take it as the advice from one performer to another.
Yeah.
And he also had a wonderful statement
Interesting.
that I've so often thought of.
Mm-hmm.
He said,
Mm-hmm.
got to remember that the composer wants the piece to succeed even more than you do.
That's funny. It's putting it. I mean, it's true, but putting it that way is sort of like it's like saying what's obvious.
Yeah, that's right.
And not thinking about. Yeah.
And so we actually had one of the most meaningful learning experiences while I was at Curtis was using the Urtext editions,
Mm-hmm.
but we went over and over a few times through all the Beethoven piano violin sonatas.
Okay.
And of course, Beethoven was a decent violinist, but of course he was a great pianist.
Yeah.
And so looking at the way the piano scores are arranged and the instructions,
Mm-hmm.
we just learned so much from Mr. Goldberg about marking and what those markings might be really understood. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, he always emphasized that Beethoven was a person who he didn't invent it. It existed before, but he explored a world of pianissimo, which became a kind of a magic world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that was really almost beyond human experience. And I think,
yeah,
and that was for a lot of reasons. There were a lot of currents where people were saying, yeah, we've got to make music that really speaks to this spiritual side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And boy, he could do it, and it was usually in pianissimo. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because so Mr. Goldberg brought a lot of exploration into how do we make those pianissimos really have that outrageous effect that is possible.
Yeah. In other
And
words, make them
yeah,
come to life.
right.
Hmm.
And this is where it became kind of well, uh, so that fast forward, the Borromeo Quartet's
Uh-huh.
done a number of Beethoven cycles. We've done all of the
Right.
pieces.
Right.
We're doing our very best with that. It's around 2007, and this is
Hmm.
another thing related to Mr. Goldberg. Like
Hmm.
I showed up at my first lesson for a violin
Hmm.
concerto, and I had a violin part, and he's kind of like, "Well, why'd you bring a violin part?
Huh.
Bring the score." And so the next lesson, I had the score, and
Yeah.
basically I never put down the scores ever since then because I
Right.
realized it doesn't make any sense not to study it from the score.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, at those times, back in the 1990s, you really couldn't play off the score, and not as a violinist anyway. It just
I was just thinking about this because technology has now started to, well, in the last 5 years, really, 10
yeah,
years, even if you, depending on who had what,
yeah.
now it is possible to play off of score, you
And
know?
so comes around to 2006 or seven.
Hmm.
I saw actually Meng Che Liu and Chris O'Reilly
Okay.
play
Yeah.
tablet, and both of them used a page turning pedal, and I was like,
That's
"That's
it.
how you do it."
Right.
And actually, a month after that, I've started playing from the computer from the score, and
Hmm.
I have never done anything since then
Yeah.
other than.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very quickly, it kind of spread to the rest of the quartet.
Hmm.
And for us, that it's such a transformation to go from working with parts to working with the score.
Yeah.
You know, quartets are famous for arguing with each other. That
Right.
they feel very passionate. Oh, it's got to be this way. It's got to be that
Hmm.
way. Inevitably,
Hmm.
it ends up kind of like my way and your way.
Hmm.
You end up
Hmm.
kind of, and of course, because they care about it so much, they get even more
Even more. Yeah. Right. Right. At fisticuffs,
and
practically.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the moment everyone's playing off the score, that really profoundly changes
Hmm.
because you start to kind of, it's almost like, people talk about cloud collaboration. Well,
Right.
everyone looking at the score kind of becomes cloud collaboration because you're
Right.
kind of all searching for a logic, and you start
Uh-huh.
talking, well, we could speed up here or we could kind of pull it back there.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
stops really being, well, I want to take time there. I really think we have to. It's more like, well, that could be one way and the other way could
Right.
be one way.
Right.
And it becomes a lot more fun to try it because you kind of see how it all works.
Yeah.
And what also becomes so clear, sometimes groups will be like unifying a bowing. But the second
Mm-hmm.
you look at the score, you often with Beethoven or Mozart or Haydn, you realize, no, actually he marked different articulation, different part.
Mm-hmm.
We should not unify our bowing.
Right.
We're actually going directly against what the
Against.
composer said.
Right. Right.
Um, but and oftentimes, these really, Beethoven for sure will have very distinct markings for the different parts,
Mm-hmm.
dynamics and
Mm-hmm.
articulations. And if when you don't, it's not that you don't learn that eventually, you eventually do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working with the score, everyone sees it right away. It's not
Right.
something that has to evolve over a long time. So
Right.
you can use that extra time for a very different process of taking it further.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a kind of an exponential increase
Mm-hmm.
of the quality of information that you're talking about. Now,
Yeah.
all of this, by the way, is leading towards the manuscripts
Mm-hmm.
because so it became our way of working as a group, and people credit us as being the first people that did this, and I wouldn't be surprised if we really were,
Mm-hmm.
because we were doing this as our total procedure in 2007.
Yeah.
IMSLP, which by the way came out of New England Conservatory of Music
Mm-hmm.
by the invention of Edward Guo,
Mm-hmm.
who's done such an incredible thing by inventing that and figuring out how to do it legally,
Mm-hmm.
which is and on IMSLP was the manuscript of Opus 59 number 3. which is, I think, a piece we may have been planning to play.
I think yes, I think so. Yep.
And so I downloaded that manuscript, and we were coming around to rehearse it. And I said, well, why don't I just read it off the manuscript? Just this was just
kind of try it out.
Curious. Yeah, just try it out.
Yeah.
And instantly, it became incredibly fascinating because they're a little bit like an archaeologist, going through a 3,000-year-old kitchen. You immediately start to see how the cooking was done.
Yeah, right.
You see that where the crossouts are, where the slurs are changed,
where
a whole section is eliminated, where a new version, where a part is switched and put in another place. In particular, in that piece, it's often fun to show the audience there are 3 different transitions to the last movement, and they're a little bit like the porridge too hot, porridge too cold, porridge just right. The first version is a 3-way canon, so it's very complex.
Yeah.
The second version, he says, no, forget about all that. I'm just going to have 2 beautifully voiced chords
moving in. Yeah, right.
Zen version. And then he eventually says, no, I'm going to just do something right in between. I'm going to have 2 voices going up in thirds, answered by 2 going down in thirds. And that's the one he chose. And then immediately on the next page is everyone loves the last movement. It's so, ebullient and unbelievable, and etc. And you see immediately that used to be forte. He just crashed right in with all this energy.
Okay.
And you see, in fact, a whole sub layer of a completely different dynamic scheme for the first 80 bars. And then you see him systematically cross out that whole layer.
Yes, he was famous for that.
Well, that's right. I mean, already just that first minute of looking at those manuscripts, you see, oh, wow, this idea, he was just so secure about it. He knew exactly what it was going to be.
Yeah.
And it unfolded, no problem. And then the next page, there's some parts in the second movement where he crossed it out so many times that you can't really quite see what's going on.
Yeah, interesting.
But I'll tell you something about Beethoven, even though he's famous for being messy, and he is. But if he really messed it up, he puts the note names. He just writes them in letters.
Right.
So you never don't know what the notes are. And so, there was kind of no turning back from that opportunity. And I only had that manuscript right at that moment. And I gradually, if I had the opportunity, I went over, I've been good friends with Lewis Lockwood, and then eventually Jeremy Yudkin, both from the Center for Beethoven Research. And, they would help me and advise me how to find manuscripts in libraries and request them. And so I just kept doing that. And at this point, I would say there are very few works of Beethoven that there's a whole set of things without opus that are the giant, but of the known works, I've pretty much seen the manuscript for, I would say, 85% of them. I remember one student was looking at 132 together with me, and we were looking at this big, super dramatic D sharp that whole group plays in unison. And she asks me, "What's that FFMO?" And I really didn't know. And I kind of looked at it, and sure enough, on all 4 parts, it says not just 2 Fs, but FFMO, and then FFMO, and then FFMO, and then FFMO. Okay. I was like, I don't know what that means. And but for whatever reason, that was like a trigger. All of a sudden somebody says, gosh, I'm seeing a lot of the color red. And then all of a sudden you'll see the color red everywhere. That was like a trigger. And all of a sudden I noticed something that I had kind of noticed, but just hadn't really paid attention to, which was that especially in the soft dynamics, he seems to employ this system where he doesn't just have piano, he has piano and then piano with one line on the stem, and then piano with 2 lines on the stem. And by the way, by just kind of correlating words to the music, the mood, I think what those lines mean is they are basically denoting emotional intensity. So 1 line is more intense.
Yeah.
2 lines is a lot more intense.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But he doesn't stop there. He does piano and then 1 line and then piano 2 lines. Then he does pianissimo, pianissimo 1 line, pianissimo 2 lines. And then he has 2 polar opposites, one of which I just mentioned, which was FFMO.
Right.
And then he does the PPMO, which is the opposite.
Okay.
And that kind of means like this is super important.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
And then, of course, crazy as Beethoven is, you have triple piano and then triple piano 1 line and then triple piano 2 lines. And by the way, these come in unbelievable, that triple piano 2 lines, like some unbelievable spots. Like in the Missa Solemnis, just when Christ has died and he's gone down and he suffered and was buried. And there's this moment when everybody should jump out of their chair where he says, and he's resurrected.
This big moment, right?
The moment right before that, the violin is on the open G string, the lowest note, and there it is, 3 Ps with 2 lines, just at that moment of suspense. So her question all of a sudden made all of this visible, like a deck of cards turned upside down.
Yeah. It's like suddenly all this information now comes to light.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, then I joke that I at that moment got manuscript fever because, more or less I would bring this up to people, serious, very serious scholars. And they would kind of say, well, nobody's ever talked about that. I don't know. And I mean, they're open-minded about it, but, and so it was very important to me to really look at as many scores as I could. And of course, if I had started to see, this sort of is a mood of a certain moment where he tried something out and then
just abandon it, right? Yeah.
But that's not how it's turned out. Actually, in every major work between 1802 and 1827, this system seems to be on purpose and exactly the same.
Right.
What seems to be consistently interesting and provides insights is that it seems, by the way, in forte dynamics, he does importance by adding letters. So if it's just forte, it's F. If it's a little more important, it's FO, like the beginning of the first note of 127.
Right.
If it's even more important, it's FOR. He skips FORT, but then if it's super important, it's the whole word forte.
Forte. Interesting. Wow.
And then staccato, and he also seems to be very important to Beethoven whether a swell pair is closed into a diamond or open.
Interesting.
And most, of course, in printing, they're all done like this.
Right. And
you can, that's okay. It's not like there's a terrible misunderstanding there, except there's wonderful spots that you can see in the scores where he makes it connected and he crosses it out and then he tries it again, disconnected, and then he makes it connected again, he crosses it out, and then he makes it disconnected again. And so clearly, and there are other ones where it was disconnected and then he draws in the connections.
Oh, wow.
And makes notes on pages that says, even though this is crossing the page, it's in 1 line.
Yeah.
Of course, we played the piece that your father wrote for Richard Stoltzman and our quartet. One of the elements in that piece was that your dad would seem to do something related to what like Beethoven was doing, but tended to do it by how many fortes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he, you know,
Yeah.
no hesitation marking 4 fortes or even 5 fortes. And then
Sometimes with an S on it. Yeah,
right,
right. S
that's
F F
right.
F F F F.
That's right. That's right. Even though Beethoven was very demanding and famous for being, you know, outrageously demanding,
Mm-hmm.
chances are he was also a rather realistic person in that he knows,
Mm-hmm.
no, if I ever want this to actually get published, I've got to, you know, stop somewhere.
Gotta sort of pull it back a little.
Uh,
Yeah.
and he also may have,
Right.
you know, there may be a way that he thought of these markings as a very sophisticated kind of language among his himself and very close friends, but maybe not even considering it relevant to
Mm.
standard players. I don't, but you see, I
You
actually
don't
don't even
know.
want to try to figure
Gonna go
that out.
there. Yeah. Right.
All I want to do is just say at this point, the overarching effect is that nobody's paid attention to these markings,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that may be right or wrong. But
Right.
my point is, let people see them,
Yeah.
and they'll see that it's in his hand. It's thousands of times. It's never a different way.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
See them,
Mm.
and then you know we'll all argue about what it means.
Right. I want to connect this to your work with contemporary music and living composers, and also how this might inform not only your approach to interpreting music by composers that you can just call up and say, "Hey, what did you mean by this?" but also what you might also impart to those composers who have yet to be writing music for string quartet or just in
Right.
general, right? In terms of like their own practice, I am often frustrated with the fact that our notation system, for all of its precision in some ways, is lacking tremendously in other ways. And so, and so I can sympathize very much with Beethoven because he was trying to find the stuff between the cracks
That's right.
in his, you know, in his way. That maybe for him in his mind he was just putting it down there because he wanted it to be there as information.
Right.
How it translates to a part or a score in a published edition, a whole different matter. But you know, music, as you know, there's so many more nuances and gradations to how you can play your own instrument and play one note,
Yeah.
that the notation system doesn't. It kind of is very coarse. It kind of slots you into various spaces and doesn't allow for a lot of in between. And so that's where performers come in, is to look at the music and then try to find the stuff in between, and to varying degrees of success depending on how much the performer knows the music or knows the language of the composer or is willing to put the time in. You know how that works, and so so now connecting the dots, like how does your work inform other work where maybe you don't have the manuscript, or either be it composers who are not with us anymore, or those who are with us? Do you have some
Well, I
way?
mean, you know, it's really interesting because I mean, hearing what you're, you know, hearing you talk about it from composing, you know, as a composer,
Mm-hmm.
and in a sense that feeling of the limits of what is possible to put
Mm-hmm.
into that,
Mm-hmm.
into the notation.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and yeah, it does seem like Beethoven was pushing that envelope as far as he could push it,
Mm-hmm.
which was, you know, pretty typical of him in all respects.
Yeah.
Um, but what I do find really important is that you know we feel this. You know, you listen to a Beethoven piece and it has this kind of miraculous inevitability about it. It's
Mm.
just like
Mm.
sort of feel odd, has to be that way.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, you look at the manuscript and you realize it didn't have to be that way, not at all.
Yeah.
And that in fact it may have been wildly different
Mm-hmm.
before he guided it into the path. And particularly
Yeah.
like in the harp quartet, slow movement, which is such a gorgeous,
Mm-hmm.
expressive movement. The second half of the movement, if you look underneath the scrape outs, there's an entire second set of dynamics for the whole end of the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Very different.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see clearly that he scraped them out, and then we have something which is the one we take. But like for students, for example, it's so important for them to see, wow, Beethoven is not like some marble statue that just dropped out of the cloud.
Right. Right.
It could have been a lot of different ways. With modern compositions,
Yeah.
that also reaffirms the fact that we need to, it's a little bit of a paradox where you really need to pay attention to everything that was put there by the composer, but you also need to say, together we want to have the freedom to try something that is not as boxed in as that marking. And of course, when you get the chance to work together, often that's exactly what happens. They say, well, yeah, that's not exactly what I marked, but I kind of like where that's going, or or maybe it is what I marked, but it's a new version of it. You know?
As a composition teacher, and I try to impart to students that you can have a very specific idea for maybe how something could go in your mind, and but be open to the possibility of what the performer may show you, because you're not always going to be there. Number one, and if you want to sort of think in some hyperbole, you can say, well, 200 years from now, when you're definitely not there to say, no, it should be the other way, you're going to be trusting whatever it is, be it the recording or the score or whatever that document is, to a performer to bring it to life. And so the flexibility, especially amongst young composers, and I find that some young composers aren't flexible where they should be, and some are too flexible where they shouldn't be. And it's a funny balance, because obviously you need direction. You're like, well, do you want it to be loud here or not? And oh, whatever, and that doesn't help you at all. That's just like,
and that's I keep saying it, but I feel like, when one gets close to music and gets close to really trying to make it speak to people, you encounter all of these paradoxes where it has to be both more restricted but more free. And by the way, Beethoven was fond of kind of expressing something like that. The famous thing he said about the grosse fugue is, somewhat studied, somewhat free. And so I think he was very, and I love this one quote of his where he was writing out just a description of an opera he had in his mind, which he never wrote. But in many ways, I connected it to the Missa Solemnis, because the Missa Solemnis. One amazing thing about the Missa Solemnis is you have Dona Nobis Pacem, the end of the mass. And, he's been using grand orchestra with timpani and trumpets. He purposefully doesn't put the timpani in the key that the piece is going to finish. The timpani is in the key of the war trumpets and the war drums. And they are always pianissimo, and they're always in the background. But the timpani doesn't join the finale of the piece. And the finale is not, the Fifth Symphony. You just end and end and end and end and end, and huge celebration.
Right.
The Missa Solemnis is, you've been listening for an hour and a half, and it has a wonderful end, but it just kind of happens.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't include the timpani.
Right.
So in a sense, there's this philosophy. And by the way, what he said about the opera is, I'm going to use tonality in a way that leaves questions. Because he says, in this unsettled time we live in, it's not appropriate to write too civilized a music.
So we would have been in Alba. So kind of a role. We would have been together in Alba, and this would have been like an amazing dinner conversation.
Indeed.
The when you just to kind of come up to the composition program and the quartet. So those of you who are watching the Alba composition program, a number of young composers and sometimes not so young composers, but composers engage in lessons and master classes and workshops and have music written for the ensemble in residence. And so in 2020, our ensemble in residence was the Borromeo String Quartet. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we couldn't make it happen. So these young composers up until the beginning of March or so, they were all writing music and had most of them had wrote music. So there's 11 or so small string quartet movements sitting now in limbo. How would you have come into the week, and how would you have come in to engage the composers and to bring this music? Because unlike, say, maybe Beethoven, where you may have a very long time to sit with the music, and of course we've got a number of recordings and all this stuff, here you have a piece that might have written 5 or 6 weeks prior to you actually landing.
Yeah. I mean, it happens that it's one of my favorite things that happens, and we get a score, and frankly, I think we basically throw everything at it. We just try to get notes going. We try to look at some of the interrelationships. We try it slowly. We try it fast. We, just anything to just get it up off the ground. And what I find, my favorite moment, and it tends to be a moment. There's a certain moment when it stops just being notes,
right,
and it becomes music.
Yeah,
and it usually, it's as if it's like that day when the trees bud.
Right. Suddenly it's winter, and then suddenly it's spring.
Suddenly they're
like we just had last week. Yeah, right.
That's right. Yeah, and I still can't believe how within 24 hours you have thousands of leaves that weren't there the day before.
Right. Right.
And in this case, we're actually still practicing it in a pretty straightforward way. But what's happened is the mental frame, all of a sudden, the landscape has become something which has that meaning. Like, okay, now I kind of sense what this is trying to do. I know where we're going to aim, and that might change. It's not that that's a
fixed point. Yeah.
But I love that moment. And there doesn't seem to be any systematic way to get to that moment. As I said, you just kind of throw everything at it until it happens. I suppose there might be a piece which is so difficult that it never happens, but I've never really had that happen. There's always been that turning point where it becomes a personal expression, and you start to feel in an instinctive way, okay, that's what the person who wrote this. I get it. Yeah. Now you might be wrong. Who knows? But
sure.
The point is one has that sensation. I have seen pieces evolve where I'm the composer. Some composers have told us and me, wow, I like something new happened that I didn't quite expect to happen. And it's not that either of us can say what it is exactly, but the piece kind of takes on a life of its own.
How does getting to know a composer, especially a young composer, but it could be any composer, personally change your relationship to their music? Does knowing the person and having an understanding of who that person is help at all in that process, or is it kind of like, say, the person and the music might exist in different orbits?
Well, I mean, it is interesting because we keep saying, I know this word keeps coming up, but there is a kind of a paradox where I mean, just because we happen to talk about Leon Kirshner, who I
Yeah.
happen to know both personally, and you know, um, it, you can't separate the person and the music, but actually they are two completely, they are universes that kind of exist parallel to each other. Some interesting other composers we had personal exchanges with were John Cage and
Hmm.
Ligeti. We had the chance to work with him,
Oh,
which was,
right. That's right. He came to NEC.
yeah. And
And
we played the second quartet for him, and he, at first he said, I don't really I don't really relate to this anymore. Which was okay.
he's,
But that was what he said for about a minute. And
uh-huh.
then he started to get into, oh no, well, you've got to actually have this color, and you've got to get that, and you've
Uh-huh.
got
Uh-huh. Right.
to,
Right.
you know, and then of course it happened that what he wanted to talk about was Schubert, which we also played.
Yeah.
And of course he was so passionate about just but there's this weird way he was looking at both of those musics and feeling all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of things about the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't exactly personal what he was saying about his own music. It was just as personal as what he was saying about Schubert.
Schubert. Yeah. Let's talk about another living composer that you've worked with and would have worked with and was our composer in residence for the program this year, Derek Bermel.
Yeah.
And so Derek, it's interesting because we come at it from two different ways. So I was at the University of Michigan, and Derek was a classmate of mine. He and I were both pursuing a master's, and Derek stayed on and got his doctorate.
Yeah.
And so I wrote music for Derek. He's a fantastic clarinet player.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's it like to work with a composer who is also a performer, and so you are in that role of sort of both interpreter and sort of musical colleague in the trenches, as it were?
Well, it's funny because I mean, I played the Copland Sextet. I think was the first piece I played with Derek.
Mm-hmm.
And and long before getting to play any music of his.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so funny. I remember I had this elaborate way of marking the sort of what I saw as the inner structure of the rhythm for the Copland, and I remember Derek looking at the way I marked it. He was kind of like, "Oh, that's really interesting."
Right.
And you see, that's so funny because again, that's relating to Copland. It's not relating to his music,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And we also did a piece by John Musto. We did, so we actually did a lot of other composers' works together before actually getting the chance to do a piece of Derek's. And a piece we did a lot was the piece for viola and string quartet, Soul Garden.
Yeah.
And that I think that's where I got closest to his music in particular.
Mm-hmm.
We also did a sort of a blues quartet movement that was really fun. And I know, of course, we were hoping to do this very interesting thing where he took, Opus 135 and kind of blew it up into
did something reality. To it. Yeah. Right.
And but Soul Garden was where I think we got really got really deep into. And again, it's so true that it's really hard to put into words what's going on. There's this very strong presence from Derek, and I can kind of, you can feel how he just wants a certain kind of energy to come out there. Interestingly, I've never felt like he's particularly trying to put that into words, but you kind of know what getting at with it. And then even in terms of playing, he's showing it, and he's showing it very effective. He plays wonderfully. But I do find it interesting that they used to say how Bartok, just is a funny thing, he was so brilliant as a pianist. But apparently when he would do a really difficult passage well, he would sort of erupt in laughter because he was just so happy he had done it well.
like he had made it, right? He got past
Right.
that, right?
Yeah. And so what I mean is I do think, and maybe that's what Mr. Goldberg was pointing out, that it's very humbling to try to play well, no matter where you're coming from.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's interesting to share that. And obviously you see Derek brings a, extraordinary set of skills to everything he does.
Yeah.
But like all players, he has to concentrate to really do it, at that highest level he can. And then we share that concentration, and we share that that sort of searching for doing it as well as we can.
Yeah. Really, it's all about the experience of making the music, or actually making the sound become music.
That's right.
Because music is beyond sound. I mean, the sound is there, and then the music is how we engage with the sound. Right. So, be it as an interpreter, performer, either the composer, or audience member who is also in that shared psychological space.
That's right.
We're all sharing that space together. It's a communal activity, in which is fascinating because it's almost an imaginary communal activity. That's what makes live performance so interesting, is because live performance has that chance that you don't know what's going to happen next, even if you know what's going to happen next, and you're all in it. You're all in it together. And I was also pointing out that, especially with new music, that might be unfamiliar to the audience, is that if it's brought to the audience in a way with conviction, you can sell almost anything to a listener.
Yeah. Can I tell you something I tell my students a lot? I say, the audience listens to what you listen to.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to the drama and the beauty of the music, and of course, if you've found that and that's what you're listening to, they hear it too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining me this morning and having a little coffee. I again, in a few years, we'll try to do this in person in Alba, over espresso and wine and all the other nice things. Like you said, the Italians found a way to live life that's why we keep going back to Italy. I mean, people always say, well, what's the big deal with Italy? Just go there and you'll know exactly what we're talking about. There's just nothing else like it. And so to make music in Italy is like a pleasure of infinite returns.
Yes. Well, but it was wonderful to talk this morning, and really it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, and I know that everyone in Italy at the Alba Festival, of course, they're very saddened, but they're very happy to be able to bring some of this to life, at the very least, in a virtual way. I would like to again thank today's guest, Nicholas Kitchen of the Borromeo String Quartet. I would also like to thank Jeff Soberschlag, Giuseppe Nova, and the entire staff of the Alba Music Festival Composition Program for making this festival such a warm and welcoming place for all of our program fellows, faculty, and guest artists over these past 5 years. We look forward to next year, when we surely hope we can all be together again in person as part of the 18th edition of the Alba Music Festival and the 6th edition of the Composition Program. 2021 is set to be a great year for the program and will feature Hub New Music as the ensemble in residence, along with Hannah Lash as the composer in residence. Our distinguished faculty includes Mary Ellen Childs, David Post, and J. Anthony Allen, who will also run an electronic and electroacoustic mini course that will run concurrently with the composition program. Guest artists will include jazz guitarist and composer Barry Finnerty, who recorded with Miles Davis and was a founding member of the Brecker Brothers Band. Musicologist and guitarist Enrico Merlin, who is one of the leading Miles Davis scholars, will visit as well, and composer and multidisciplinary instrumentalist Alex Lubet, who is professor of composition at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, will attend and give several lectures. Applications will open later in the summer of 2020. Please visit www.albacomposition.com for more information. Also, visit our page on Facebook/Alba Composition and Instagram @Alba Composition. We thank you very much for taking the time to watch today's program, and we wish all of you to remain happy, healthy, and safe.